Chosen one, pause. You think some acts go unpunished. You think some words disappear into the air. You think some betrayals dissolve with time. They don't. There is a mechanism older than memory and quieter than thunder, a system that does not announce itself, does not argue, does not rush yet, never fails to respond. An unseen hand is already moving, already measuring, already recording what human eyes overlook and human courts misjudge. This is not a theory you stumble upon. It is a law you eventually collide with. Every unjust act sets something in motion, not vengeance, not chaos, but repayment, precise, calibrated unfolding, according to a wisdom untouched by emotion or impatience. What unsettles most people is not that justice exists, it's that it doesn't need witnesses, it doesn't need agreement, it doesn't need permission. It operates whether you believe in it or not. That's why some who seemed untouchable suddenly unravel. That's why some who caused harm walk freely for years, even decades before the ground beneath them quietly shifts. Not because justice forgot them, but because justice was waiting for the exact moment when return would be complete. You were never meant to chase repayment with your own hands. You were never meant to prove what you endured. You were meant to survive long enough to watch the law reveal itself. Because this system does not protect the loud, it protects the aligned. And if you are listening to this now unsettled but strangely steady, it's because something in you already knows. What was done in secret was never safe. What was taken unjustly was never kept. What was twisted against you was never final. The question was never whether justice would arrive. The question was whether you would endure long enough to understand how it moves. The unseen hand is not approaching, it is already active. And you are not outside its reach, you are under its covering. You were told the unseen hand is already active, that you stand under its covering, not because you demanded justice, but because you remained aligned while others distorted the order. Now listen, that hand does not improvise, it follows a law. There is a universal principle woven into existence itself, older than any religion, older than any language, a rule that does not negotiate with intention or excuse itself for delay. Every action releases a corresponding return, not metaphorically, structurally. What you send out does not vanish. It enters a system that remembers shape, weight, and motive, and it will answer in kind even if the response arrives wearing a different face in a different season through an unexpected door. This is not about morality as humans define it. It is about balance. The universe does not argue with what is unjust. It corrects it. That's why some people feel pressure without understanding why. That's why others experience loss without tracing it back to a single moment. They are not being targeted, they are being answered. Every act bends the scales. Every word carries a charge. Every decision deposits something into an account that cannot be emptied through denial. You were raised to believe consequences are immediate or non-existent, that if something does not happen right away, it never will. But reciprocity does not operate on your clocks. It operates on readiness. Sometimes the return comes quickly, sharp, and obvious. Sometimes it waits not out of mercy but precision, allowing patterns to complete themselves until the response is unavoidable and unmistakable. This is where people misunderstand divine justice and mistake patience for absence. They think silence means approval. They think delay means escape. They think survival means exemption. It doesn't. Ancient wisdom traditions across cultures recognize this truth long before systems tried to control it. Different names, same law. What you sow returns. What you distort corrects itself. What you take unjustly demands balance. Not because the universe is cruel, but because it is ordered. You feel this law more acutely because you live closer to alignment. You notice when something is off. You sense when actions carry weight beyond the visible moment. That sensitivity is not weakness, it is calibration. And here is what most never grasp: reciprocity does not only return harm, it returns integrity. Every time you chose restraint over retaliation, something was recorded. Every time you refused to become what injured you, something shifted in your favor. Every time you absorbed injustice without corrupting your own center, the scales adjusted quietly. This is why your life has not collapsed the way others expected it to. This is why what was meant to break you instead refined you. This is why pressure did not erase you. You are not being spared. You are being accounted for. The law does not rush to punish. It waits to reveal. And when it does, the return is never random. It is exact. What unsettles people about this truth is that it removes the illusion of escape. There is no loophole, no clever justification, no forgotten act. Everything participates. Everything returns. And once you see this, once you recognize the pattern moving beneath the surface of events, you can no longer pretend injustice dissolves into nothing. It doesn't. It accumulates, it matures, it answers. And the unseen hand you were told about does not intervene emotionally. It enforces this law flawlessly. You can feel the law now, the return, the inevitability moving beneath events. And this is where many lose clarity. They confuse divine justice with human revenge and assume the two move the same way, fueled by anger, urgency, and the need to be seen. They don't. Revenge is loud because it is insecure. Justice is silent because it is certain. Human retaliation seeks relief. Divine justice restores balance. That difference matters because when you expect justice to behave like revenge, you misread the silence and conclude nothing is happening. You assume the delay means the scales are frozen. They are not. Justice does not rush because it does not need to prove itself. It waits because timing is part of the correction. Think of how often people reveal themselves only when they feel safe. How patterns continue when they believe no consequence is coming. How character unfolds fully only when pressure is absent. Delay is not mercy, it is exposure. What appears unpunished is often being allowed to complete itself. Injustice is permitted to expand just enough to show its true shape before it is answered. This is the part that unsettles you because you were conditioned to believe that if something wrong continues, it has been approved. But divine justice does not interrupt prematurely. It lets the lie speak until it contradicts itself. It lets imbalance grow until it can no longer hide. That is why sudden reversals feel so shocking to observers. They didn't see the years of accumulation beneath the surface. They only noticed the collapse. You were never meant to interfere with this process. Every time you tried to force resolution, it drained you. Every time you held back, something preserved you. Not because passivity is holy, but because interference would have corrupted the correction. There is also a reason you were told not to repay wrong with wrong. Not as a moral command, but as a protective instruction. The moment you step into revenge, you absorb the weight of what you answer. You take on a burden that was never assigned to you. Justice does not need your hands, it needs your alignment. This is why those who retaliate prematurely often feel empty afterward. They got reaction, not restoration. They discharged energy but did not correct the imbalance. You, however, were held back, and it felt unfair. You watch people walk freely while you carried the consequences of what they initiated. You wondered if restraint made you foolish, if patience made you invisible. It didn't. It marked you as separate. Divine justice does not mirror the harm it answers. It rearranges the environment around the one who caused it until the return is unavoidable and self-evident. That is why it often looks like coincidence. A series of unrelated events, a slow erosion rather than a strike. But nothing is accidental. The silence you mistook for absence was actually precision in motion. The delay you questioned was part of the calibration. And now you can see why those who mock justice only do so early in the story. They laugh before the pattern completes. You didn't. You waited. You endured. You stayed aligned when it would have been easier to become cruel. That choice did not disappear into nothing. It positioned you on the side of a law that does not forget. You were shown that silence was not absence, that delay was not dismissal, that restraint placed you inside the correction rather than outside it. Now look closer at how it actually moves. Justice does not strike like lightning. It composes like music. There is an unseen orchestra at work, instruments entering one by one, timing calculated tension, building beneath what sounds like quiet. Nothing dramatic at first, nothing obvious, just adjustments. A door closes without explanation. An opportunity dissolves. A relationship strains. A strength weakens where confidence once stood. These are not random disruptions, they are notes. Divine justice unfolds by accumulation, not spectacle. Each unjust act adds pressure to a structure already misaligned, and the longer it stands, the more precise the correction must be. This is why people misread what they see. They expect justice to announce itself with punishment. Instead, it rearranges conditions. Those who cause harm are not immediately confronted with guilt. They are confronted with themselves, placed in environments that echo their own distortions back to them not as accusation, but as experience. This is the precision that escapes human perception. Justice does not always return through the original victim. Often it returns through circumstance. A person who manipulated truth finds themselves surrounded by confusion. One who exploited trust begins losing control. One who inflicted pressure starts collapsing under invisible weight. And from the outside, it looks like life. But underneath, the law is answering. Timing is everything here. If justice arrived too early, it would interrupt the pattern before it fully revealed itself. If it arrived too late, it would appear disconnected. So it waits until the moment when cause and effect align so clearly that denial becomes impossible. This is why sudden collapses feel disproportionate. They aren't. They are cumulative. Every small injustice that seemed insignificant was counted. Every minor distortion contributed. Every dismissed act added weight to a scale no one was watching. You sensed this even when you couldn't explain it. You felt that something was building, that what you endured was not isolated, that what you were witnessing would not remain unresolved. That intuition was not imagination. It was alignment with the rhythm of the law. The unseen orchestra does not rush its crescendo. It ensures that when the sound finally breaks the silence, it cannot be mistaken for noise. And this is where your patience mattered more than you knew. Because while others mistook delay for safety, you sensed it for what it was: preparation. While others assumed nothing was coming, you learned to stand without demanding proof. Justice unfolds invisibly until the moment it becomes undeniable. By the time most people notice, it is already finished. What you just saw was timing, accumulation, precision. But now you must understand what is being measured, because the scales of the Most High do not weigh the way humans do. You were taught to see justice as a scoreboard: good versus bad, right versus wrong, winners and losers. That is not how these scales function. They do not measure appearances. They measure alignment. Divine justice is not concerned with who looked innocent. It is concerned with who remained true, not who spoke correctly, but who stayed integrated when pressure demanded fracture. This is where people misjudge outcomes. They assume that because someone succeeded materially, they were approved. Because someone struggled, they were failing. Because someone remained unexposed, they were safe. But the scales do not reward performance. They respond to purity of alignment. What you carried through injustice mattered more than what was done to you. Not because harm was excused, but because distortion reveals itself by contrast. The scales weigh coherence. When someone acts unjustly, something inside them fractures. They may appear whole, they may appear confident, but internally they drift out of alignment with order. And that misalignment always demands correction. This is why divine justice often looks unfair to the surface observer, because it is not reacting to events. It is responding to internal states. You saw people who harmed others continue forward for a time. You saw yourself stall, struggle, wait, and you wondered why the scales felt uneven. They weren't. You were being stabilized. They were being allowed to drift. Justice does not always elevate the righteous immediately. Sometimes it anchors them, preserving integrity, while the unstable are given enough rope to reveal imbalance. This is not favoritism. It is physics. The Most High does not intervene emotionally. Order does not get offended. It corrects deviation naturally. And the deeper the deviation, the more comprehensive the correction must be. That's why some reckonings feel existential rather than situational. Why careers collapse alongside identity. Why relationships dissolve alongside reputation. The scales don't just adjust outcomes, they realign beings. You felt this working in you too. Moments where you were tempted to compromise, opportunities where you could have cut corners, chances to become colder, sharper, crueler, and chose not to. Those choices were not small. They kept you within the field of protection. Justice is not about punishing wrongdoing. It is about restoring order. And order always protects what remains true to itself. That is why even when you were hurt, you were not hollowed out. That is why pressure refined rather than corrupted you. That is why your center held. The scales saw that, and they continue to. You now see the scales measure alignment, not appearance. Purity, not performance. Coherence, not noise. This is where the phrase chosen one must be corrected. Because it was never about favoritism. The chosen are not selected because they are special. They are recognized because they are aligned. You were not protected because you were preferred. You were protected because you refused to fracture. When pressure came, you did not abandon your center. When injustice struck, you did not let it rewrite you. When silence followed, you did not distort yourself to be seen. That is what selection looks like. The law does not elevate those who demand it. It stabilizes those who remain intact under weight. This is why the chosen path often feels lonely. Alignment separates. Those who cut corners move faster for a while. Those who bend truth feel lighter at first. Those who exploit systems appear successful early. And you wondered why your road felt heavier, why progress felt delayed, why obedience felt costly. Because alignment carries weight that shortcuts avoid. But weight builds strength. The chosen are not exempt from pressure, they are entrusted with it. Not because they are stronger at the beginning, but because they are willing to remain whole while others fragment. This reframes everything you endured. You were not overlooked, you were being preserved. The same law that allows injustice to complete itself also shields those who refuse to participate in distortion. That shielding does not look like ease, it looks like endurance. You were spared outcomes that would have broken you later, even when they looked attractive in the moment. You were slowed when speed would have cost you integrity. You were denied access to rooms that would have hollowed you out, and you mistook that for rejection. It wasn't. It was filtration. The chosen are filtered, not flattered. They are kept from what would corrupt them, even when corruption looks like success. This is why your vindication does not come with applause. It comes with stability. While others unravel under the weight of their own misalignment, you remain standing not because life was kinder to you, but because you stayed aligned with the law when no one was watching. This is not a title to claim. It is a condition to maintain. And now you understand why protection followed you without announcement, why outcomes bent in your favor without explanation, why what should have destroyed you did not. You were not chosen to be admired. You were chosen to remain intact. And that is a far heavier calling. You were shown that being chosen meant remaining intact, not being spared. Filtered, not flattered. Preserved, not praised. Now you must understand how this preservation becomes protection. Because protection is not always the absence of harm, it is the containment of damage. Those who trust divine justice are not shielded from impact. They are shielded from corruption. When unjust acts were directed at you, something could have hardened. You could have internalized bitterness, suspicion, or the need to control outcomes. That would have been the real loss, but you didn't. And that restraint did more than preserve your character, it redirected the consequences. When you refused to retaliate, you did not suppress justice, you released it. You stepped out of the cycle that traps most people, the loop of reaction, escalation, and mutual damage. That loop feels powerful at first. It feels like agency, but it binds everyone inside it to the same weight. By trusting the law instead of your anger, you removed yourself from that weight. This is why peace began to return to you before circumstances changed, why your clarity increased even while resolution lagged, why your strength stabilized instead of spiking and crashing. Protection begins internally. Those who pursue revenge are consumed by the very imbalance they try to correct. Their energy drains into monitoring, rehearsing, replaying. You were spared that erosion, not because you were passive, but because you were anchored. Trusting divine justice does not make you weak. It makes you unavailable to manipulation. People who act unjustly often rely on provoking reaction. They need you to carry part of what they initiated. When you didn't, their actions had nowhere to land. This is why you noticed a strange reversal. The more you let go, the more pressure seemed to return to them. The calmer you became, the more unstable they grew. That was not coincidence. Justice flows toward imbalance naturally. When you refused to absorb it, it followed the only remaining path. This is how vindication begins long before exposure. You felt it when your sleep returned, when your intuition sharpened, when your life stopped orbiting around what was done to you. That was protection taking form, and eventually external circumstances follow internal order. Truth does not need defense forever. It needs endurance. You were never meant to prove your innocence through force. You were meant to outlast distortion. That is how justice protects the righteous. Not by striking their enemies down, but by making sure the damage never takes root in them. You felt the protection take form inside you first. Peace before proof. Stability before resolution. This is where suffering changes meaning, because suffering does not disappear under divine justice. It is transmuted. What was meant to deform you was repurposed to refine you. You were not strengthened by avoiding pain. You were strengthened by carrying it without letting it rewrite your identity. Every season where answers were delayed, something else was happening. Your discernment sharpened, your boundaries clarified, your dependence on external validation dissolved. Suffering stripped away illusions gently at first, then decisively. You stopped expecting fairness from people who had no interest in order. You stopped seeking closure from those invested in confusion. You stopped waiting for acknowledgement from systems built on distortion. That was not resignation, it was maturation. Patience under injustice does something rare. It teaches you how to stand without explanation. Most people need resolution to move forward. You learned how to move with unanswered questions and remain whole. This is why your faith deepened quietly. Not belief in outcomes, but trust in process. You sensed that what was happening to you was not random, that pressure had intention, that endurance was forming something precise. And it was. Suffering, when met with alignment, becomes a forge. It burns off what cannot endure truth. Your reaction softened. Your ego loosened its grip. Your need to be right was replaced by the need to be true. This is refinement. It does not feel victorious. It feels costly. You lost versions of yourself you once relied on, certainties you thought you needed, attachments that once felt essential. But what remained was unshakable. That is why when justice eventually begins to surface externally, it does not intoxicate you. It does not make you cruel. It does not consume your attention. You already did the deeper work. Those who waited only for vindication are stunned by it. Those who were refined by the waiting are steady when it arrives. This is how divine justice completes its work. It does not only correct imbalance outwardly, it restores integrity inwardly. And that restoration lasts longer than any moment of exposure ever could. You were refined in the waiting. You were stabilized in the silence. Now comes the part most people try to avoid. Alignment is not passive. Up to now, you have endured, you have trusted, you have allowed justice to work without interfering. But divine justice does not end with protection. It moves toward responsibility. Because once you see the law, you are no longer innocent of it. Living in alignment with divine justice means you stop pretending your choices are neutral. You stop assuming your inner state does not affect the field around you. You accept that what you carry inwardly shapes what you encounter outwardly. This is where integrity becomes non-negotiable. Not performative integrity, not moral branding, but internal coherence. You must become the same person in private that you are in public. The same in silence that you are in conflict. The same when no one is watching as when everything is at stake. This is not about perfection. It is about consistency. Divine justice flows most freely through those who are internally aligned. Those who do not fracture under convenience. Those who do not excuse themselves while condemning others. That is why forgiveness enters here not as a sentimental virtue, but as a structural requirement. Forgiveness is not saying the injustice was acceptable. It is saying you refuse to carry what does not belong to you. Unforgiven resentment binds you to the one who wronged you. It keeps the circuit open. It keeps the energy circulating instead of resolving. Justice cannot fully complete its work while you are still gripping the offense. Not because justice needs your approval, but because resentment distorts your alignment. Forgiveness closes the loop. It releases you from the karmic weight of replaying, rehearsing, and reliving what already happened. It frees your attention. It restores your clarity. This is why forgiveness often feels harder than anger. Anger feels active. Forgiveness feels like surrender. But it is not surrender to injustice. It is surrender to order. You are not asked to forget. You are asked to stop carrying. When you forgive, you step out of the shadow of the act and back into your own center. And from that position, justice has clean access. Alignment also demands honesty with yourself. You must look at where you benefited from silence, where you avoided responsibility, where you delayed growth by waiting for someone else to change. Divine justice does not only repay others, it corrects you. That correction is gentle when you cooperate, severe only when you resist. Living in alignment means you stop outsourcing your conscience. You stop blaming systems for choices you knew were misaligned. You stop calling fear wisdom and avoidance patience. This is where the chosen one path becomes narrow. Because once you understand the law, you are accountable to it. You can no longer plead ignorance. You can no longer justify small distortions. You can no longer pretend that intention overrides impact. But this is not a burden, it is freedom. Alignment removes friction, it simplifies decisions, it clarifies boundaries. You stop asking, will this work, and start asking, is this clean? That single shift protects you more than strategy ever could. When you live this way, you don't need to monitor justice. You don't need to track outcomes. You don't need to compare paths. Your only task becomes staying true, and truth has a gravity of its own. This is how you contribute to a just world, not by fixing everyone else, but by refusing to participate in distortion. Your presence becomes corrective. Your integrity becomes stabilizing. Your life becomes evidence. This is not loud work. It rarely gets applause, but it is powerful. Because alignment with divine justice does not just shield you from harm, it makes you part of the mechanism that restores order. You are no longer just protected by the unseen hand. You move with it. You have followed the law far enough now to feel its weight, not as fear, as gravity. Because at this stage, divine justice is no longer a concept you observe from a distance. It is a reality you must choose to stand within. There comes a moment when understanding turns into accountability, and this is that moment. You now know that nothing is lost, that no act disappears, that every distortion eventually answers for itself, not through rage, but through order. This is where many people quietly turn back, because the truth is not just that injustice is repaid, it is that alignment costs something too. It costs illusions. Once you see how justice truly operates, you can no longer hide behind ignorance. You cannot pretend that small compromises don't matter. You cannot live split lives without feeling the tension. The law becomes internal. You begin to feel resistance before consequences, discomfort before collapse, conviction before exposure. That is mercy, but it is also responsibility. From this point forward, neutrality is no longer available to you. You either live in alignment or you feel the friction of resisting it. This is the irreversible choice most people never articulate. They want justice to punish others without correcting themselves. They want protection without discipline, vindication without refinement. But the unseen hand does not divide justice that way. The same law that repays injustice also demands coherence, and coherence is exacting. You will notice it in subtle ways. You will feel unease when words don't match intent. You will sense heaviness when actions drift from truth. You will lose peace faster when you excuse what you once confronted, not because you are failing, because you are awake. This is why the chosen one path narrows as clarity increases. Not fewer opportunities, but fewer illusions. Not less freedom, but fewer escapes. You are no longer insulated by confusion. You are guided by law, and here is the final revelation that seals everything you've heard. Divine justice does not only repay unjust acts, it repositions those who endured them. Those who were aligned but wronged are not merely restored, they are relocated. You may not have noticed it yet, but your tolerance has changed. Your standards have sharpened. Your willingness to remain in distorted environments has diminished. This is not arrogance, it is calibration. Justice does not return you to who you were before the injustice. It moves you forward. What was meant to diminish you becomes the threshold you cross. You outgrow spaces that once confined you. You shed identities built for survival. You no longer negotiate your worth with systems that thrive on imbalance. This is vindication without spectacle. No announcement, no public reversal required. Just a quiet elevation into a different field entirely. Those who harmed you may never fully understand what happened. They may blame circumstances. They may accuse fate. But you will know. You will know that what they intended to damage became the very mechanism that separated you from them. This is the justice that endures beyond moments. Because punishment fades, but repositioning lasts. The Most High does not merely settle accounts, He rearranges destinies. And this brings us to the present moment, not someday, not eventually. Now, you are living in a season where justice is accelerating, not emotionally, but structurally. Old systems are destabilizing. False authority is cracking. Unaligned power is eating itself. And those who remain coherent under pressure are being quietly advanced, not to dominate, but to stabilize. You were not refined so you could gloat when justice surfaces. You were refined so you could stand when others fall. This is the responsibility side of vindication. You carry clarity others don't yet have. You see consequences before they manifest. You feel the law before it speaks aloud. That means your choices matter more now, not less. Every word you release carries weight. Every alignment you maintain strengthens order. Every refusal to participate in distortion shortens its lifespan. You are not waiting for justice anymore. You are living inside it, and that is the final comfort. Because once you understand this law, fear loses its grip. You no longer panic when injustice seems to flourish. You no longer envy shortcuts. You no longer rush outcomes. You know what is coming not as threat, but as certainty. The unseen hand does not miss. It does not forget. It does not miscalculate. Every unjust act is already accounted for. Every aligned endurance already recorded. Every hidden choice already weighed. Nothing is unresolved. The only remaining question is not whether justice will be done. It is whether you will continue to walk in alignment as it unfolds. Stand there, chosen one. Not triumphant, not bitter, not afraid, clear, whole, aligned. Because in a world where justice is invisible until it is complete, the greatest sign of protection is not escape. It is standing exactly where you are unshaken while the law finishes its work. You've walked the full arc now, from interruption to revelation to responsibility. So this final movement is not instruction, it is settling. Chosen one, breathe here. Not because the work is finished, but because the tension is no longer required. You do not need to brace yourself against the world anymore. You do not need to scan for danger in every silence. You do not need to rehearse what you would say if justice never came. You already know better. What you have learned is not that justice will arrive dramatically. It is that justice has always been present quietly, accounting, steadily, arranging, patiently unfolding. And that knowledge changes how you stand. There is a calm that only comes after long endurance. Not relief, not celebration, clarity. You are no longer asking why certain things happened. You are no longer demanding explanations for every delay. You are no longer measuring your worth by the speed of outcomes. That phase is over. What replaces it is something subtler and stronger. Trust without naivety, patience without passivity, peace without denial. This is the state divine justice was preparing you for all along. Because if justice had arrived before you were ready, it would have overwhelmed you. If vindication had come before refinement, it would have distorted you. If answers had arrived early, they would have fed ego instead of wisdom. Timing protected you. Now when you look back, you can see it. Moments that felt like abandonment were actually containment. Delays that felt cruel were actually surgical. Losses that felt senseless were actually preventative. You were spared futures that would have cost you your center. You were redirected away from paths that rewarded performance, but punished integrity. You were slowed until your inner world could support the weight of what was coming. This is not romantic, it is precise. And now you move differently. You are not driven by urgency. You are not fueled by resentment. You are not waiting for anyone's collapse to feel validated. You don't need to. Justice does not need witnesses to be complete. It needs alignment, and alignment has become natural to you. You choose cleaner words now, clearer boundaries, quieter confidence, not because you're trying to be virtuous, but because distortion feels loud in your body, because compromise feels heavy before it looks convenient, because you can sense when something is off long before it breaks. That sensitivity is not a curse. It is the reward of staying awake through the waiting. You were not shaped to react to the world. You were shaped to remain stable within it. So when you see injustice now, it does not ignite panic. It does not provoke you to intervene prematurely. It does not shake your faith in order. You recognize it as unfinished business. You let the law do its work. This is how fear dissolves, not through reassurance, but through understanding. You know what happens when imbalance goes unchecked. You've watched it long enough, and you know what happens when integrity is maintained quietly, consistently, without applause. It endures, so this wind down is not an ending. It is a return to stillness with eyes open. You are allowed to rest your vigilance now. Not your values, your vigilance. You don't need to prove that you see anymore. You don't need to convince anyone else of what's unfolding. Those who are meant to notice will. Those who aren't will learn another way. Your task is simpler than you think. Remain aligned. Remain clean. Remain whole. Let justice finish what it started, because it always does. And when you move forward from here, it won't be with the hunger for vindication, but with the steadiness of someone who knows nothing was missed, nothing was wasted, nothing was unresolved. The unseen hand is not looming. It is not threatening. It is steady. And you, chosen one, are already standing where you need to be.